My name is Dorothea Callahan, and I'm 70 years old. For most of my life, I believed that family was everything. I raised my son, Garrett, with every ounce of love I had after my husband passed away when Garrett was only 12. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure he had every opportunity I never did. I put him through college, helped him start his business, and when he married Sloan 5 years ago, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. The November rain was particularly heavy that Thursday evening in Portland. I remember because the sound of it against the windows had always brought me comfort, a reminder of all the cozy evenings I'd spent in this house over the past 40 years. I had just returned from my weekly volunteer shift at the community center, my joints aching more than usual from the cold dampness that seemed to seep into my bones these days. I was hanging my coat in the hallway when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen. Garrett and Sloan were staying with me for the week while their house was being renovated. They didn't know I'd come home early because my shift had been cut short due to the storm. Sloan's voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought I couldn't hear her. Sharp, dismissive, cruel, in a way that made my stomach tighten even before I understood her words. I mean, honestly, Garrett, that old woman only exists to pay our bills, she said with a laugh that cut through me like ice. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the coat rack, rainwater dripping from my sleeves onto the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself 20 years ago. My son's response was what truly broke something inside me. He laughed. Not an uncomfortable, nervous laugh, but a genuine, agreeing chuckle that told me this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. "Well, Mom does like to help out," Garrett said, his voice casual, as if they were discussing the weather rather than reducing my entire existence to a financial transaction. "Help out?" Sloan scoffed. "She practically begs us to let her pay for things. Did you see how eager she was to cover the renovation costs? $50,000? Just like that. I barely had to suggest it. My legs felt weak. I pressed my back against the wall, needing its support. The renovation. I'd been so happy when they'd asked for my help. Garrett had seemed stressed about the finances. And I'd thought, what else am I saving this money for? Why not help my son and his wife create their dream home? The best part, Sloan continued, and I could hear the clink of wine glasses, is that she thinks we actually need her. Like we can't manage on our own. To be fair, the business has been slow, Garrett said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. Please, your business is fine. We could pay for everything ourselves if we wanted to. But why should we when she's so desperate to feel useful? I stood there in my own hallway, in the house I'd turned into a home through decades of love and effort, and felt like a stranger. The rain continued its steady drumming against the roof, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the Oregon hills. That's when I heard Sloan say something that changed everything. Once we get the house finished and the trust fund she promised us is transferred, we can finally stop pretending. No more Sunday dinners. No more listening to her boring stories about the old days. We can move to California like we planned. California? Garrett's voice held a note of surprise. Why not? There's nothing keeping us here except her. And once we have what we need, well, she'll be fine. Old people are resilient, right? She'll make new friends at that retirement home you were looking into. My hand went to my chest, where my heart was pounding so hard, I feared it might give out right there. A retirement home? I'd never mentioned wanting to move to a retirement home. I loved my house, my independence, my life. I realized with devastating clarity that they'd been planning my future without me. They saw me not as a person, not as Garrett's mother who'd sacrificed everything for him, but as an obstacle to be managed, a resource to be depleted and then discarded. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for my clothes to stop dripping, long enough for the initial shock to transform into something else, something harder, something that felt almost like the woman I used to be, before age and loneliness had made me so desperate for my son's approval that I'd become blind to what was happening. I walked quietly back to the front door, opened it, and then closed it loudly, calling out as I always did, "I'm home." The storm cut our shift short. I heard the scrambling in the kitchen, the sudden silence, and then Sloan's voice, bright and artificial. "Dorothea, we were just talking about you. Come have some wine with us." I walked into the kitchen with a smile that felt like a mask. They were both standing by the counter, wine glasses in hand, looking perfectly innocent. Garrett came over and kissed my cheek. "How was volunteering, Mom?" "Wonderful," I said, studying his face, looking for some sign of the boy I'd raised. Just wonderful. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I would do something I should have done years ago. I would take control of my own life, my own finances, my own future, and I would teach them both a lesson about taking people for granted. Chapter 2, The Plan. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in my bedroom, watching the shadows from the streetlights play across the ceiling, listening to the rain that had settled into a steady rhythm. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Sloane's mocking voice, saw Garrett's complicit smile. At 3 a.m, I got up and went to my office. This small room at the back of the house had been my sanctuary for years. The desk where I'd managed the household finances, planned my late husband's business after his death, and eventually built my own modest investment portfolio. I'd been careful, frugal even, always thinking about leaving something substantial for Garrett. I turned on the computer and began making lists. First, I needed to understand exactly what I'd been giving them. The numbers, when I laid them out in black and white, were staggering. Over the past 5 years, since Garrett married Sloane, I'd paid for their wedding, $28,000. Covered 3 different car repairs totaling nearly $15,000, paid off Sloane's credit card debt twice, another $18,000 given them the down payment for their house, $100,000, and just last month, transferred $50,000 for their renovation, $211,000, plus the countless smaller gifts, the dinners I insisted on paying for, the groceries I'd buy when I visited, the utility bills I'd helped with when Garrett claimed the business was struggling. My hands trembled as I typed, not from age, but from anger, an anger so pure and fierce that it made me feel young again, vital, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. By dawn, I had a plan. It wasn't about revenge, though I won't pretend that didn't factor into it. It was about dignity, about teaching them that people, even old people, especially old people, have value beyond their bank accounts. The next morning, Friday, I called my lawyer, Benjamin Ashford. We'd gone to high school together a lifetime ago, and he'd handled my affairs since my husband died. Ben, I need to see you today. It's urgent. Dorothea, is everything all right? No, I said simply, but it will be. I met him at his office downtown, a modern building that always made me feel slightly out of place with its glass walls and minimalist furniture. But Ben's personal office was warm, filled with old books and photographs. A reminder that beneath the corporate veneer, he was still the boy who'd helped me with algebra homework. I told him everything. He listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as I spoke. I want to restructure my estate, I said finally, and I want to limit Garrett's access to the accounts he uses. You have every right to do that, Ben said carefully. But Dorothea, have you considered talking to Garrett first? Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. I heard what I heard, Ben. My son laughed when his wife called me an old woman who only exists to pay bills. There's no misunderstanding in that. He nodded slowly. What do you want to do? Over the next 2 hours, we restructured everything. The trust fund I'd been planning to give them, nearly $400,000, would now be redirected to various charities after my death, with only a small portion going to Garrett, enough to show I hadn't forgotten him, but not enough to fund the lifestyle they'd been planning. More immediately, I had Ben contact all my credit card companies and the bank. Garrett and Sloane had cards linked to my account for emergencies. Those would be blocked by Monday morning. This will cause quite a stir, Ben warned. Good, I said. It's time they learned to stand on their own feet. And the house? He asked gently. You mentioned they were pressuring you about a retirement home. This is my house, I said firmly. I'm 70, not dead. I'm not going anywhere unless I choose to. When I left Ben's office, the rain had stopped, and weak November sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the cool, clean air, feeling lighter than I had in years. That weekend passed in a strange normalcy. We had dinner together both nights, and I watched them with new eyes. Sloane was charming, attentive even, asking about my week, complimenting the food. Garrett was his usual self, though I noticed now how he'd check his phone constantly, how he'd exchange glances with Sloane that I was clearly not meant to understand. Sunday afternoon, while they were out, I went through the guest room where they were staying. I'm not proud of this, but I needed to know more. in Sloane's planner. I found notes. Dee's house, market value $875,000. Dee's investments, approximately $1.2 million. Trust fund, $400,000. They'd been calculating my worth like I was already dead. Beneath that, in Garrett's handwriting, care facilities in Portland, $5,000 to $8,000 monthly. They were planning to put me away and live off what I'd worked my entire life to build. I took photos of the pages with my phone, closed the planner, and left the room exactly as I'd found it. That night at dinner, Sloane brought up the trust fund. Dorothea, Garrett, and I were thinking about our future, about maybe expanding the business, and we were wondering if you'd given any more thought to that trust fund you mentioned. I took a sip of my wine, set down my glass carefully. Oh yes, I've been thinking about it quite a lot, actually. I met with Ben, my lawyer, just this week. Garrett perked up. You did? That's great, Mom. Yes, I said, smiling. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. The look of satisfaction on their faces made my stomach turn, but I kept smiling. Monday morning would be very interesting indeed. Chapter 3. The Call. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, clear weather that Portland rarely sees in November. I was up early, as always, drinking my coffee by the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the maple trees in my backyard with gold light. Garrett and Sloane were still asleep. They'd never been early risers. I knew the cards would be blocked by 8 in the morning. Ben had arranged it all. I'd deliberately suggested that Garrett and Sloane try that new expensive restaurant downtown for lunch, even insisted they go, said I wanted them to enjoy themselves. I'd practically forced $200 cash into Sloane's hand for dinner last night, knowing she'd refuse to use it once she thought she had unlimited access to my credit cards. At 9:30, my phone rang. Garrett's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice light and casual. Good morning, sweetheart. Mom? His voice was tight, stressed in a way I recognized. It was the same tone he'd used as a teenager when he'd gotten in trouble. Mom, something's wrong with your credit cards. Wrong? What do you mean? They're blocked. All of them. Sloane and I tried to pay for coffee this morning, and the card was declined. We thought it was a mistake, but we've tried 3 different cards now, and they're all blocked. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Oh, those cards. Yes, I had them blocked. You what? I could hear Sloane's voice in the background, sharp and demanding. I had them blocked, dear. I met with my lawyer on Friday, and we decided it was time to restructure my finances. Those cards were for emergencies, remember? And you both have good jobs, good income. You don't need my cards anymore. But Mom, we're at the restaurant. People are staring at us. The waiter is waiting. Don't you have your own credit cards, Garrett? The pause told me everything I needed to know. They'd maxed out their own cards, expecting me to continue funding their lifestyle indefinitely. We've had some cash flow issues with the business. Then perhaps you shouldn't be eating at expensive restaurants, I said simply. I'm sure you have enough cash for a more modest lunch. Mom, this is ridiculous. Why didn't you tell us you were going to do this? Why didn't you tell me you were planning to put me in a retirement home? The words came out harder than I'd intended, propelled by weeks of suppressed hurt. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could picture them, standing in that restaurant, the color draining from their faces. What are you talking about? Garrett finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. I heard you, both of you. Thursday night. Every word. I heard Sloane grab the phone. Dorothea, you misunderstood. We were just joking around. You know how we are. Were you joking when you calculated the market value of my house? When you planned to move to California once you'd gotten everything you needed from me? When you called me an old woman who only exists to pay your bills? We would never, but she couldn't finish the lie. It hung in the air between us, as substantial as the truth. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady. You're going to figure out how to pay for your own lunch. You're going to move back to your own house, renovation finished or not, and you're going to learn to live within your own means. But the trust fund, Garrett said, his voice breaking. You promised, and there it was. Not an apology, not remorse, just concern about money. The trust fund has been redistributed. Ben has all the details. The majority will go to charities that actually help people instead of exploit them. You'll receive a small portion, enough for a modest start if you ever decide to stand on your own feet. You can't do this. Sloane's voice was shrill now. We have legal rights. We can contest this. You're welcome to try, I said calmly. I'm sure a court would be very interested in hearing about your plans for me. I have evidence, by the way. Photos, recordings. Ben has copies of everything. I hadn't actually recorded them, but they didn't need to know that. The photos of Sloane's planner were real enough. Mom, please, Garrett said, and I heard tears in his voice. Can we talk about this? Can we come home? This is my home, Garrett. Not yours. Not anymore. Your home is the house I gave you the down payment for. I suggest you go there. But it's not finished. There's no kitchen. The bathroom isn't working properly. Then I suppose you'll learn to manage, won't you? Just like I managed after your father died. Just like I managed working multiple jobs to put you through school. Just like millions of people manage every single day without someone else paying their way. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, not from fear or regret, but from the sheer weight of what I'd just done. I'd severed a relationship that had defined my entire adult life. I'd chosen dignity over family, self-respect over the illusion of love. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. For the next hour, I sat in silence, drinking coffee that had gone cold, watching the light change in my backyard. Then I got up, got dressed, and went for a walk. Portland's streets had never looked more beautiful. Chapter 4. Unexpected Support. 3 days passed in strange peace. I'd expected Garrett and Sloane to show up at my door, to demand entrance, to create a scene, but there was nothing, just silence. I later learned they'd gone to stay with Sloane's parents in Seattle, too ashamed or too angry to face me. I tried to settle into my routine, but everything felt different now. The house that had always felt full of memories now echoed with absence. I'd chosen this, I reminded myself, but that didn't make it easier. On Thursday, exactly a week after I'd overheard that devastating conversation, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my neighbor, Patricia Reeves, standing there with a casserole and a determined look on her face. "All right, Dorothea," she said, pushing past me into the house. "I've given you 3 days to wallow, and now it's time to talk." Patricia was 73, a retired school teacher who'd lived next door for 15 years. We'd always been friendly, sharing garden tips and the occasional cup of tea, but never particularly close. "How did you—" I started. "Know something was wrong? Please. I've seen Garrett and Sloane's car sitting in your driveway every evening for months, and suddenly it's gone. You've been walking past my house twice a day looking like you've lost your best friend. And Betty Chen at the bank mentioned you'd made some big changes to your accounts. Small-town gossip, dear. It's both a curse and a blessing." Despite everything, I laughed. It felt good to laugh. Over coffee and her truly terrible casserole, which I ate anyway because it was kind, I told her everything. She listened without interruption, her expression growing fiercer with each detail. "Good for you," she said finally, so vehemently that I was startled. "Good for you, Dorothea. Do you know how many women I've seen let their children bleed them dry? How many of my former students have called their parents nothing but ATMs? But he's my son," I said quietly, "and you're his mother, which should have meant something to him, which should have protected you, not made you a target." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You did the right thing. The hard thing. Yes, but the right thing. I feel so alone." "You're not alone. You've just been so focused on being needed by the wrong people that you haven't noticed all the people who actually care about you." Over the next few weeks, I discovered Patricia was right. When I finally returned to my volunteer shift at the community center, I was greeted with warmth and genuine concern. Maria Santiago, who ran the literacy program, hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "We missed you," she said. "Are you okay? You look tired." I found myself telling her a simplified version of the story. By the end of the shift, 3 other volunteers had pulled me aside with their own stories of family betrayal, financial exploitation, and the difficult choices they'd had to make. "My daughter stole my credit card," Eleanor Martinez told me. She was 68 and had worked as a nurse for 40 years, racked up $20,000 in debt before I caught her. I had to file a police report. My own daughter. "My son convinced me to sell my house and move in with him," Robert Kim said. He was 75 and had been a postal worker. "Then he treated me like a servant. I was cooking, cleaning, babysitting his kids, paying for groceries. When I complained, he threatened to throw me out. I had to move to a small apartment, start over, but at least I have my dignity. Their stories were different from mine, but the theme was the same. People we loved had seen us as resources rather than humans, and each of us had reached a breaking point where we'd had to choose ourselves. It was Robert who suggested I join the senior advocacy group that met at the community center. I'd always thought of it as something for other people who were really old, people who needed help. But when I walked into that first meeting, I realized these were some of the strongest, most vibrant people I'd ever met. The group was led by Janet Wu, a 78-year-old former attorney who'd built a second career fighting for seniors' rights. She had silver hair cut in a sharp bob, bright red glasses, and an energy that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "Welcome," she said. When Patricia introduced me, "Tell us your story." So I did. And when I finished, Janet smiled. "You've taken the first step," she said. "You've reclaimed your power. Now let's talk about what comes next." What came next, I learned, was building a life that wasn't defined by other people's needs. The group met twice a week, and I started attending both sessions. We discussed everything from financial planning to dealing with manipulative family members to staying active and engaged as we aged. Janet became something of a mentor. She'd been through her own family crisis years ago, when her sons had tried to have her declared incompetent so they could access her estate. She'd fought them in court and won, then dedicated herself to helping other seniors do the same. "The problem," she told me over coffee one afternoon, "is that society tells us we're supposed to sacrifice everything for our children. And when we do, when we give and give until there's nothing left, we're still seen as the selfish ones if we dare to say no. I keep wondering if I overreacted," I admitted. "If I should have just talked to Garrett, given him a chance to explain." "Did he apologize?" Janet asked. I thought about the phone call, about his concern for the trust fund, about the lack of remorse. "No." "Then you didn't overreact. You protected yourself. That's not selfish. That's survival." I started to rebuild my life piece by piece. I took a watercolor class at the community college. I joined a book club. I volunteered more hours at the literacy program, working with adults who were learning to read, and found profound satisfaction in helping them unlock a world they'd been excluded from. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I still missed Garrett. Not the man he'd become, but the boy he'd been. The child who'd run to me with scraped knees and broken hearts, who'd believed I could fix anything. That version of my son was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed. Maybe I'd just been too blind to see who he really was. Chapter 5. The First Contact. 6 weeks after I'd blocked the credit cards, on a cold December evening, my doorbell rang. I was in my kitchen making soup, the radio playing softly, when I heard it. My heart jumped in a way I hated. After all this time, part of me still hoped it might be Garrett, coming to apologize, to make things right. It was Sloane. She stood on my porch looking different than I'd ever seen her. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of her designer clothes. No makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, but I steeled myself. I'd learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, lacking its usual confidence. Everything in me wanted to say no, to close the door and return to my soup and my new, peaceful life. But I'd been raised to be polite, and old habits die hard. I stepped aside. She walked into the living room but didn't sit, standing instead by the window, looking out at the darkening street. "Garrett doesn't know I'm here," she said finally. "He's in Seattle with my parents. They're helping us with the house, with money. It's been difficult." I didn't respond. I waited. I wanted to say I'm sorry. She turned to face me, and I saw tears in her eyes. What I said that night, what we said, it was horrible, unforgivable. "Yes," I agreed. "It was. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to understand something." She took a shaky breath. "I grew up poor, Dorothea, really poor. My father worked construction, and my mother cleaned houses. We lived paycheck to paycheck. I swore when I was a kid that I'd never be poor again. So you decided to use me." "Yes." The The simple honesty of it surprised me. When I met Garrett and learned about you, about what you had, I saw an opportunity, and I took it. I manipulated the situation, manipulated him, manipulated you. I became the person I swore I'd never be. Why are you telling me this? Because running away from poverty turned me into someone worse than poor. It turned me into someone who hurt people, who used them. And I won't live like that anymore. She pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the coffee table. This is a payment plan for all the money we took from you. It'll take us years, maybe decades, but I'm going to pay you back every penny. Garrett doesn't agree. He thinks we don't owe you anything, that you gave us that money freely. And maybe legally he's right, but morally, we stole from you. We stole your dignity, your trust, years of your life spent working and saving. I picked up the envelope, opened it. Inside was a detailed spreadsheet listing every dollar I'd given them, with a proposed payment schedule of $500 a month. I got a second job, Sloane continued, waitressing at night. It's humbling, but I need humbling. I need to remember what it's like to work for every dollar. What about Garrett? I asked. Her expression turned sad. Garrett is angry. Angry at you for cutting us off. Angry at me for taking your side. We're separated. I'm living with my parents in Seattle, trying to figure out who I am without money, without scheming, without using people. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Whatever she'd done, whatever pain she'd caused, I didn't take joy in her suffering. Don't be. This is the consequence of my actions. I'm just sorry it took losing everything for me to see what I'd become. She moved toward the door, then paused. I know I have no right to ask this, but please, don't completely give up on Garrett. He's lost right now, but he's not a bad person. I brought out the worst in him. Maybe without my influence, he can find his way back to the son you raised. After she left, I sat for a long time, holding that envelope, crying for the first time since this had all begun, crying for my son, for the daughter-in-law who might have been, for all the wasted years and broken trust. But when the tears stopped, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, someday. I put the envelope in my desk drawer, unopened. I wasn't ready to think about payments or schedules. I just wanted to sit with the knowledge that someone had genuinely apologized, had taken responsibility, had tried to make amends. It was more than I'd expected, more than I'd hoped for. That night, I called Patricia. Sloane came to see me, I said. And I don't know what to think. She apologized. She's trying to pay me back. Do you believe her? I don't know, but I think I want to. Then take it slow, Patricia advised. Keep your boundaries, protect yourself, but leave the door open a crack. Sometimes people do change. And if she hurts me again, then you'll survive that too. You're stronger than you think, Dorothea. Chapter 6. The Holidays. December turned colder, and Portland was hit with an unusual snowstorm just before Christmas. The city, unprepared as always for winter weather, ground to a halt. I watched from my window as neighbors helped each other shovel driveways, as children built snowmen, as the world turned white and quiet. I'd always spent Christmas with Garrett. Even after he married Sloane, we'd maintained the tradition of Christmas morning at my house. I'd make my special cinnamon rolls. We'd open presents by the tree. We'd watch old movies. It was the one day of the year that felt like we were still a family. This year, the house felt especially empty. I'd put up a small tree, more out of habit than enthusiasm, but hadn't bothered with most of the other decorations. What was the point? On Christmas Eve, Patricia knocked on my door. Get dressed, she said. You're coming with me. Patricia, I'm fine. I just want to sit here and feel sorry for yourself. No, you're coming to community Christmas dinner. We need help serving, and you're going to help. The community center had transformed. Lights strung everywhere, tables set with donated decorations, the smell of turkey and ham filling the air. Dozens of people were there, some volunteers, some guests who had nowhere else to go on Christmas. I spent the evening serving food, talking to strangers, listening to stories. There was Marcus, a veteran who'd lost touch with his family years ago. There was Lisa, a young single mother who couldn't afford to go home to visit her parents in Florida. There was Samuel, an 82-year-old widower whose children lived overseas. Each of them had a story, Each of them was spending Christmas alone, but somehow, together, we weren't alone at all. After dinner, we sang carols. I have a terrible voice, always have, but I sang anyway, feeling something inside me begin to heal. This wasn't the Christmas I'd planned. It wasn't the Christmas I'd wanted, but it was real, and it was good, and it was enough. When I got home that night, I found a package on my doorstep. Inside was a handwritten card from Sloane, and a scarf she'd knitted herself. The card was simple. Merry Christmas, Dorothea. Thank you for everything you gave us, even when we didn't deserve it. I'm still working on becoming someone who does. I wore that scarf to Christmas morning service at the church I'd attended for 40 years. Reverend James had known me since Garrett was a baby, and he'd heard about the situation through the inevitable small-town gossip network. After the service, he pulled me aside. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Some days are better than others," I admitted. "That's honest. I appreciate honest." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, one of the hardest things about faith is accepting that sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're grieving. You're grieving the relationship you thought you had, the son you thought you raised. That grief is real and valid, but it doesn't mean you made the wrong choice." His words stayed with me through the quiet days between Christmas and New Year. I'd been so focused on whether I'd done the right thing that I hadn't allowed myself to simply grieve. On New Year's Eve, Janet from the senior advocacy group hosted a party. It was small, just 8 of us, but it was warm and full of laughter. At midnight, we toasted to new beginnings, to second chances, to the courage it takes to start over at any age. "To Dorothea," Janet said, raising her glass. "She who taught us all that it's never too late to choose yourself." The others echoed the toast, and I felt my eyes fill with tears. But these were different tears. Not tears of loss or anger, but tears of gratitude. I'd lost a son, or at least the version of him I'd believed in. But I'd gained something too. A community, friends, self-respect. The new year arrived with a strange mix of endings and beginnings. I started 2025 alone in terms of family, but surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. Chapter 7. Garrett's Return. January brought freezing rain and short, dark days. I'd settled into my new routine, mornings at the gym, where I'd started a water aerobics class, afternoons volunteering, evenings either with my book club or at home with the books I'd been meaning to read for years. I'd received 2 payments from Sloane, $500 each month, deposited into my account with a simple note. Payment 1 of $422, and then payment 2 of $422. 422 months, over 35 years. She was 29 years old. She'd be 64 when she finished paying me back. If she finished. Part of me wanted to tell her to stop, that I didn't need the money. But I understood that this wasn't really about the money. It was about her reclaiming her integrity, proving to herself that she could change. On a Tuesday afternoon in mid-January, I was coming home from the grocery store when I saw a car parked in front of my house. Garrett's car. My stomach clenched. I sat in my own driveway for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. I could drive away, go to Patricia's house, avoid this confrontation, but that would just delay the inevitable. He was sitting on the porch steps, looking thinner than I remembered, older. His face was drawn, and he had dark circles under his eyes. When he saw me, he stood, but didn't approach, just waited. I got out of the car, leaving the groceries for later, and walked up the path I'd walked thousands of times. My path, my house, my decision whether to let him in. "Hello, Garrett." "Hi, Mom." His voice cracked on the word Mom, and I steeled myself against the instinct to comfort him. "What are you doing here?" I wanted to talk, to apologize. "Can we go inside?" I looked at him for a long moment. This man who was my son, who had my husband's eyes, who I'd loved more than life itself. Then I unlocked the door and led him to the living room. We sat in the same chairs we'd sat in 1,000 times before, but everything was different. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. "I've been in therapy," Garrett said finally. "Since November," Sloane insisted before she left. "She said I needed to figure out who I was without her, without your money, without the crutches I'd been using my whole life. And have you? I asked. Figure out who I am. He laughed bitterly. I'm 38 years old, and I have no idea. I thought I did. I thought I was a successful businessman, a good husband, a decent son. But when everything fell apart, I realized I was none of those things. The business is fine. It always was fine. We were making good money, not enough to live the lifestyle Sloane wanted, the lifestyle I convinced myself we deserved, but enough, more than enough for a normal life. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Do you know what the worst part is? My therapist asked me when I last did something nice for you, something that didn't benefit me. I couldn't remember. Mom. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to think of a single thing I'd done for you in the past 5 years that wasn't about getting something in return, and I couldn't think of anything. The admission hurt more than I expected. What about Father's Day? I said quietly. You took me to lunch. You paid for lunch. And I spent half the time on my phone dealing with a client. You deserved better than that. You always deserved better than what I gave you. Why? I asked. The question I'd been holding since November. Why did you treat me that way? What did I do to make you think it was okay? You didn't do anything wrong. That's what makes this so awful. You were a perfect mother. You sacrificed everything for me. And somewhere along the way, I started to see that as weakness instead of strength. I started to think you owed it to me, that your sacrifices meant I didn't have to make any of my own. He was crying now, tears running down his face unchecked. I heard what Sloane said that night, about California, about the retirement home, about using you, and I laughed. Mom, I laughed because I agreed with her, because I'd been thinking the same things, how much easier our life would be once we had full access to your money, how we could finally live the way we wanted once we didn't have to pretend to care about your boring life. Each word was a knife, but I needed to hear this. I needed to understand the depth of the betrayal. When you blocked the cards, when you changed everything, I was furious. I called you every name I could think of. I told Sloane you were a vindictive old woman, that you'd always been controlling, that we were better off without you. And now I understand that you saved me. You saved me from becoming a person so morally bankrupt that I could justify using my own mother. You gave me the hardest gift anyone's ever given me, the gift of consequences. He looked up at me, his face ravaged by tears, and what looked like genuine remorse. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not here to ask for money or help or anything else. I'm here to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every way I hurt you, for every time I took you for granted, for every moment I made you feel like you were nothing but a bank account. What do you want, Garrett? What do you really want? I want to be your son again. Not the man who used you, but the son who loved you. I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. I want a chance to show you that I can change, that I'm not the person I became. I sat there, looking at my son, seeing both the boy he'd been and the man he'd become, and I realized that forgiveness wasn't a simple switch I could flip. It was a process, a journey, something that would take time and effort and proof. I can't give you an answer today, I said finally. You hurt me too deeply, but I'm willing to try, slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. Chapter 8. Rebuilding. The next few months were difficult and awkward, and sometimes painful. Garrett and I met for coffee every 2 weeks, always in public places, always for limited amounts of time. We talked about his therapy, about the business he was learning to run honestly, about the life he was building for himself. He'd moved out of the renovated house, unable to afford it without my help. He was renting a small apartment in Southeast Portland, living modestly, learning to cook his own meals, manage his own finances, stand on his own feet for the first time in his adult life. It's humbling, he told me during one of our coffee meetings in February. I'm 38 years old, and I'm learning things I should have learned in my 20s. How to budget, how to save, how to live within my means. Better late than never, I said. He'd also started volunteering at a youth mentorship program, working with teenagers from single-parent homes. It was Mao, he said, his therapist's idea. She thought it might help me understand what you went through, raising a kid alone, trying to give them everything while having nothing. These kids, Mom, Some of them are so angry at their parents for not giving them more, not understanding that their parents are doing everything they can. And I was one of those angry kids. I never appreciated what you did. I just wanted more. I didn't respond. These conversations were still hard, full of landmines and old hurts, but they were necessary. In March, Sloane called me. It was the first time we'd spoken since her Christmas visit. "I wanted to let you know I got promoted at work," she said. "It comes with a raise, which means I can increase my monthly payment to you. I'd like to send $750 instead of $500 if that's okay." "Sloane, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. This isn't just about paying off a debt. It's about proving to myself that I can be someone different, someone better." "How are you?" I asked. "I'm okay. Really okay. Maybe for the first time in my life. I'm in therapy too, working through my issues with money and self-worth. I'm dating someone, actually. He's a teacher. Makes less in a year than I used to spend on clothes. And I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm glad. Dorothea, I want you to know that I'm grateful for what you did. Cutting us off was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to confront who I'd become and decide who I wanted to be." After we hung up, I sat for a long time thinking about change, about second chances, about the complicated nature of redemption. In April, Garrett asked if he could take me to lunch for my birthday. Just lunch, nothing expensive, at a small cafe I'd mentioned liking. He picked me up at my house, and I noticed he was driving an older car, not the BMW he'd had before. "Sold the BMW," he said when he saw me looking. "Couldn't afford the payments without your help. This is a 2012 Honda. It's reliable and paid for." Lunch was pleasant. We talked about his work, about a new client he was excited about the kids he was mentoring. For the first time in months, the conversation felt almost natural. After lunch, he handed me a small box. "It's not much," he said, "but I wanted to get you something I could actually afford. Something that meant something." Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a book, because I'd always loved reading, because he remembered. "I love it," I said, and I did. "Mom, I know we're not back to where we were. I know it'll take time, maybe years, maybe forever, but I want you to know that I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to be the son you deserve to have." I put on the bracelet, felt its weight on my wrist. "Keep trying," I said. That's all I can ask. Chapter 9. The Setback. May arrived with unseasonable warmth and a crisis that tested everything we'd been building. Garrett's business hit a rough patch. A major client pulled out, leaving him with unpaid invoices and a cash flow problem. He called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I need to talk to you." My heart sank. This was it, I thought. This was when he'd ask for money, when all his promises about change would evaporate in the face of real financial pressure. "I'm listening," I said carefully. "I have a problem with the business. A big one. I'm going to lose my apartment if I can't make rent, and I have payroll due for my 2 employees. I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to figure out what to do, and I keep thinking about how easy it would be to just call you and ask for money. But you're not asking," I said slowly. "No, I'm not. Because that would undo everything I've worked for these past 6 months. It would prove that I haven't really changed. That when things get hard, I still see you as my backup plan. So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to call the landlord and ask for an extension on rent. I'm going to talk to my employees and see if they can wait a week for their paychecks. I'm going to contact every client who owes me money and push for faster payment. I'm going to figure it out myself, the way adults do. And if you can't figure it out, then I'll have to let go of my employees, move to a cheaper place, scale down the business. I'll have to face the consequences of my decisions without making them your problem." After we hung up, I sat in my office, staring at my checkbook. It would be so easy to write him a check, to fix his problem, to smooth over this rough patch. But Janet's voice echoed in my head. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let people fail." I didn't write the check. I didn't call him back with an offer to help. I waited. A week later, he called again. "I did it," he said, and I could hear the exhausted pride in his voice. The landlord gave me an extension. Both employees agreed to wait for their paychecks. I collected on 3 outstanding invoices. "It's going to be tight for a while, but I'm going to make it. I'm proud of you," I said. And I meant it. There was a moment, Mom, in the middle of all of this, when I almost called you, almost fell back into old patterns. But then I thought about how disappointed you'd be, how disappointed I'd be in myself, and I just couldn't do it. That's growth, Garrett. Real growth. But that night, alone in my house, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because letting him struggle had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every instinct had screamed at me to help him, to rescue him, to make everything okay, and I'd had to fight against myself, against a lifetime of putting his needs before my own boundaries. Patricia found me the next day at the community center, still processing what had happened. "Isheen, you did the right thing," she said when I told her. "Then why do I feel so guilty? Because you're a mother, because you've spent your whole life protecting him. But Dorothea, you can't protect him from growing up. You can't protect him from learning to take care of himself. He needed to know he could do it on his own. You gave him that." In June, something unexpected happened. Garrett invited me to an event at the youth center where he volunteered. One of the kids he'd been mentoring was graduating high school, the first in his family to do so. "His name is Andre," Garrett told me as we walked in. "He reminds me of me, actually. Smart, capable, but used to taking shortcuts, used to relying on everyone else to smooth his path." The ceremony was small but meaningful. Andre gave a speech thanking his mentors, and when he mentioned Garrett, my son's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Afterward, Andre introduced me to his mother, Carmen. "Your son changed my boy's life," she said, tears in her eyes. Andre was headed down a bad path, and Garrett helped him see another way. On the drive home, I asked Garrett about it. "And what did you tell Andre that made such a difference?" I told him my story, about how I used people, took advantage of my mother, lived beyond my means. I told him how I lost everything, including my self-respect, and I told him how hard it's been to rebuild, but how worth it's been to become someone I can actually be proud of. You helped him by being honest about your failures. Yeah, turns out my biggest mistakes might end up being the most useful thing about me. Chapter 10. A difficult truth. In July, I went for my annual physical. I'd been feeling more tired than usual, but I'd attributed it to age, to the emotional toll of the past year. Dr. Patel, who'd been my physician for 20 years, ordered some additional tests. "Probably nothing," she assured me. But let's be thorough." The call came 2 weeks later. Could I come in to discuss the results? I knew before I walked into her office. "You don't get asked to come in for good news. It's your heart," Dr. Patel said gently. "You have significant blockages. We need to do surgery, likely a bypass. The good news is we caught it. The bad news is we need to act soon." I sat there, absorbing this information, feeling oddly calm. "How long do I have? If I don't do the surgery?" "Dorothea, that's not... How long? Maybe a year, maybe less. But with the surgery, you could have 10, 15, 20 more good years. And the risks of the surgery? There are always risks, but the risk of not doing it is much higher." I scheduled the surgery for August, giving myself a month to put my affairs in order. This time, I didn't mean financially. Ben had already helped me with that. I meant emotionally. I told Patricia first. She cried, then got angry, then insisted on being there for the surgery. "You're not going through this alone," she said firmly. I told Janet and the senior advocacy group. They rallied around me with the same fierce protectiveness they'd shown me all year. But telling Garrett was different. I debated for days whether to tell him at all. We'd made so much progress, but it was still fragile. Would this news break it? Would he feel obligated to help me out of guilt rather than genuine care? Finally, I called him and asked him to come over. He knew something was wrong the moment he saw my face. What happened? I told him about the diagnosis, about the surgery, about the risks and the prognosis. He listened in silence, his face growing paler. "And when is the surgery?" "August 15th. "I'll be there. I'll take time off work. I'll drive you to the hospital. I'll stay with you during recovery. Garrett, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Not because I owe you, not out of guilt or obligation, but because you're my mother, and I love you, and I want to be there." The sincerity in his voice made my eyes fill with tears. "Thank you," I whispered. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between us. Garrett came over several times a week, helping me prepare for the surgery, making sure I had everything I needed. He was attentive without being overbearing. helpful without being intrusive. One evening, as we were going through my medical paperwork, he said quietly, "I'm scared. So am I. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when we're finally starting to rebuild. The doctors are optimistic. The surgery has a high success rate. I know, but I keep thinking about all the time I wasted, all the years I took you for granted. What if this is all the time we get? Then we make the most of it," I said. "No more regrets. No more looking back. We move forward from here." The night before my surgery, Garrett stayed at my house. We watched old movies, the ones we'd watched together when he was young. Around midnight, as the credits rolled on the third film, he turned to me. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago." "What is it?" "I'm proud to be your son. Not because of the money you gave me or the opportunities you provided, but because of who you are. Your strength, your dignity, the way you stood up for yourself when you'd had enough. You taught me more in these past 9 months than in all the years before." I reached over and took his hand. "I'm proud of who you're becoming, Garrett, the man you are now, the man you're working to be. That's the son I always hoped you'd become." We sat there in the quiet house, holding hands like we had when he was small and afraid of the dark. But this time, we were both afraid, and both finding courage in each other. Chapter 11. The Surgery. The morning of August 15th dawned cool and misty, typical for Portland in late summer. Garrett drove me to the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Patricia met us there, along with Janet and several others from the senior advocacy group. "You've got quite the support system," the nurse commented as she prepped me for surgery. "Yes," I said, looking at the faces of people who'd become my family over the past year. "Yes, I do." Before they wheeled me away, Garrett leaned down and kissed my forehead. "I love you, Mom. I'll be right here when you wake up." The surgery lasted 6 hours. I learned later that Garrett stayed in the waiting room the entire time, pacing, drinking terrible coffee, calling for updates every hour. Patricia and the others took shifts keeping him company, bringing him food he didn't eat, reassuring him with a confidence they didn't entirely feel. When I woke up in recovery, groggy and disoriented, his was the first face I saw. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, his eyes red from crying. "You made it. You're going to be okay." Recovery was slow and painful. I spent a week in the hospital, then another 3 weeks restricted to bed rest at home. Garrett took a leave of absence from work to help me. He stayed in the guest room, helped me with medications, cooked meals, managed the stream of visitors who came to check on me. It was during this time that I truly saw how much he'd changed. He was patient when I was irritable from pain. He was gentle when helping me walk to the bathroom. He was present in a way he'd never been before, not checking his phone constantly, not complaining about the disruption to his life. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into my recovery, I found him in the kitchen, crying over a pot of soup he was making. "Garrett, what's wrong?" He wiped his eyes quickly. "Nothing. I was thinking about how you did this for me. When I was sick as a kid, you'd take care of me, make me soup, sit by my bed, sacrifice sleep and work to be there. And I never really appreciated it until now. I never understood what it meant to put someone else's needs before your own. You're learning," I said gently. "I'm trying. God, I'm trying so hard to be the person you always believed I could be." Sloan came to visit in September, after I'd been cleared to have more visitors. She brought flowers and homemade cookies. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better. Stronger every day." We talked for a while, catching up on her life. She'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend, the teacher. They were planning a simple wedding, something they could afford themselves. "I wanted to ask you something," she said hesitantly. "I know I don't have any right, but I'd like you to come to the wedding, if you're up to it, if you're willing." I was surprised by how much the invitation meant to me. "I'd like that," I said. Really. You've worked hard to change at Sloan. You deserve happiness." After she left, Garrett asked, "Are you sure about going to her wedding?" "Yes, she made mistakes, terrible ones. But she's owned them and she's changed. That takes courage." "You're more forgiving than I am. Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned that holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts anyone else." By October, I was strong enough to return to my volunteer work, though on a reduced schedule. My first day back at the community center, I was greeted with hugs and tears and genuine joy at my recovery. "We missed you," Maria said. And it wasn't the same without you. I'd spent so much of my life believing that my value came from what I could provide financially. But these people valued me for who I was, for my time, my presence, my care. It was a profound shift in understanding my own worth. Chapter 12. Moving forward. November arrived again, marking a full year since I'd overheard that conversation that changed everything. I was standing in my kitchen, in almost the exact same spot, when the memory hit me. But everything was different now. Garrett was still a regular part of my life, but on new terms. We saw each other weekly, sometimes more, but our relationship was based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. He'd grown his business successfully, paid his bills on time, built a life he could be proud of. Sloane had paid back nearly $10,000. At her current rate, she'd be 61 when she finished. I'd decided that when she reached $25,000, I'd forgive the rest. Not because she didn't owe it to me, but because I believed she'd learned her lesson, and because holding her to decades of payments wasn't about justice anymore, it was about punishment. And I wasn't interested in punishing people who were genuinely trying to change. I attended Sloane's wedding in November. It was small, held in a community garden, with maybe 40 guests. She looked beautiful in a simple dress she'd bought at a consignment shop. When she saw me, she came over and hugged me tightly. "Thank you for coming. It means everything." "Thank you for inviting me." Garrett walked me to my seat, his arm linked through mine. "Are you okay with this?" he asked quietly. "Being here? I'm okay with it. More than okay. She's moving forward with her life. We all are." The ceremony was lovely, full of genuine emotion and simple joy. As I watched Sloane and her teacher husband exchange vows about being partners in all things, equal and supportive, I felt genuinely happy for her. At the reception, Garrett and I danced. He'd never been much of a dancer, stepping on my toes more than once. But we laughed about it. "I have something to tell you," he said, as we swayed to the music. "I'm seeing someone. Her name is Maya. She's a social worker, works with foster kids. She doesn't care about money or status or any of that stuff I used to think mattered. I'm happy for you. I wanted to tell you first because your opinion matters to me, and because I wanted you to know that I learned from my mistakes. Maya and I split everything 50-50. We both work, we both contribute, we both respect each other. That's how it should be. I know. I just wish I'd figured that out sooner." Later that evening, back at home, I reflected on the year. I'd lost things. The illusion of a perfect relationship with my son. The comfortable fiction that family always comes first, no matter what. A certain innocence about how the people we love can hurt us. But I'd gained things too. Self-respect, real friendships, a community that valued me, a deeper understanding of my own worth. And perhaps most importantly, I'd gained a relationship with my son that was based on truth rather than manipulation, on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. It wasn't perfect. Garrett and I still had moments of tension, times when old patterns threatened to resurface, but we talked through them now. We were honest with each other in a way we'd never been before. The senior advocacy group had asked me to share my story at their annual conference. I'd agreed, hoping that my experience might help other seniors who were being taken advantage of by their families. Standing at that podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, some young, some old, all with their own stories of betrayal and resilience, I realized something important. "We spend our whole lives being told that family is everything," I said, "that we should sacrifice for our children, that we should put them first no matter what. And those things can be true, but they're not the whole truth. Sometimes, loving someone means setting boundaries. Sometimes, helping someone means letting them struggle. Sometimes, the most important person you need to care for is yourself." The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most were the individual conversations afterward. Person after person shared their stories, thanked me for giving voice to their experiences, told me they'd found the courage to make changes in their own lives. On my way home that evening, I stopped by the cemetery where my husband was buried. I hadn't been in months, too caught up in the drama of my own life. I did it, I told his headstone. I stood up for myself. I set boundaries. I hope. I saved our son from becoming someone neither of us would recognize. It was hard. God, it was hard. But I think, maybe, it was necessary. The wind rustled through the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded his grave, and in that moment, I felt at peace. I was 71 years old. I'd survived heartbreak, betrayal, major surgery, and the complete restructuring of my life. I'd lost things I thought I couldn't live without, and discovered strength I didn't know I had. My relationship with Garrett would never be what it was. Too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. But it was something real now, something built on truth rather than illusion, and that was enough. As I drove home through the quiet Portland streets, past houses lit with warm light, past families gathered for dinner, past lives being lived in all their messy complexity, I realized that this was my story. Not the story I'd planned, not the story I'd wanted, but the story I'd lived. And it was a good story. Not perfect, not without pain, but authentic, hard-won, and entirely mine. The house that had felt so empty a year ago now felt peaceful. I'd learned to find comfort in my own company, to enjoy the quiet, to build a life that wasn't centered entirely on someone else's needs. I made myself tea and settled into my favorite chair with a book. Tomorrow, I'd volunteer at the literacy program. Next week, Garrett was bringing Maya to meet me. Next month, I was traveling to Seattle with Patricia to visit her daughter. Life wasn't perfect. My heart still bore scars, both physical and emotional. I still sometimes felt the ache of loneliness, the grief of what I'd lost. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Free to make my own choices. Free to set my own boundaries. Free to live my life on my terms. And that freedom, hard-won and precious, was worth every difficult moment it had taken to achieve it. The end. This story teaches us that love without respect is not really love at all. That sometimes the most loving thing we can do is say no. That our worth is not measured by what we can give others, but by who we are. And that it's never too late to choose ourselves, to demand dignity, to rebuild a life on our own terms. Recovery is possible, change is possible, but not everything can be fixed, and not all endings are happy. Some are just real and true and bittersweet, and sometimes that's enough.